World-famous bedtime stories from Mom. Today's story is Sleeping Beauty. Once upon a time, in a land of beautiful mountains and rivers, there lived a king and queen. This couple was dearly in love. Yet, they were saddened by one thing. Despite waiting for years, they were unable to have a child. How wonderful it would be to have a child. They would often say this, wishing deeply in their hearts. One day, the queen was playing in the pond in the beautiful palace garden. Under the warm sunlight of a peaceful afternoon, suddenly, the water stirred, and a frog leapt out. This was no ordinary frog, but one that could speak, much like a fairy. "Your wish will soon come true, my queen." Hearing these mystical words, the queen was both startled and overjoyed. She treasured these words deeply. Could the frog's words truly come to pass? Hope filled the queen's heart. News of this event spread quickly within and beyond the palace walls. People whispered about the frog's prophetic words. That year, a miracle happened in the queen's womb. She gave birth to a very beautiful daughter. News of the baby princess spread rapidly among the people. Everyone rejoiced at the news. The king decided to celebrate his daughter's birth with a grand feast. This feast was to be the grandest and most splendid ever seen in their land. Many distinguished guests from near and far were invited. However, the most important guests were the 13 fairies of the land, invited to bless the princess. The king sent out invitations to each fairy. They possessed unique magical powers and could bestow special blessings on the princess. Yet, the queen had a concern. "We only have 12 golden plates. What shall we do?" After much deliberation, they decided not to invite one of the fairies. This was a tough decision. The king and queen worried that it might bring misfortune. However, they had no other choice but to accept the reality that they had only 12 golden plates. Preparations for the feast were underway. The palace was decorated magnificently, and the finest chefs were busy preparing the feast. Decorated with flowers and lanterns, the palace looked like a scene from a fairy tale. The celebration for the princess's birth was magnificent. The palace inside and out was filled with a festive atmosphere, and joy was evident on everyone's face. The fairies stepped forward one by one, bestowing their blessings on the princess. "May you have a warm heart." The first fairy wished for the princess to be kind-hearted. "May you be wise." The second fairy wished for the princess to be wise and earn everyone's respect. "May you be beautiful." The third fairy blessed the princess to be beautiful, both inside and out. Thus, each fairy came forward and gave their blessings to the princess. The palace was filled with joy and laughter, and the blessings given to the princess were numerous and precious. Just as the 12th fairy was about to step forward, a fierce wind enveloped the palace. Doors slammed shut, and windows rattled loudly. Everyone looked around in alarm. Then, the uninvited 13th fairy appeared. Her presence was markedly different from the others. A chilling aura emanated from her eyes, and the atmosphere in the palace darkened instantly upon her arrival. The 13th fairy moved forward slowly. All eyes were fixed on her. The king and queen looked at her with a mix of astonishment and worry. Nobody knew why she had come or what was on her mind. The 12 fairies who had come forward to bless the princess were also shocked. They exchanged worried glances, wondering what the uninvited fairy would say. fearing her blessing might actually be a curse. On the princess's 15th birthday, she would prick her finger on a spindle and die, proclaimed the 13th fairy's curse throughout the palace. Her voice rang clear and cold, filling the palace. With those words, she left the castle. The princess will prick her finger on a spindle and die on her 15th birthday. This statement instilled deep fear in everyone's hearts. The atmosphere in the palace turned icy in an instant. The queen was speechless with horror at such a dreadful curse. She could only cry, unsure of what to do. Tears streaming down the queen's face mirrored the deep despair in her heart. With deep love for her daughter, she wished to protect the princess from this terrible curse at all costs. The king, the queen, and all the courtiers, having heard this terrifying curse, felt a heavy sadness. They couldn't believe the princess's future was predicted in such a horrific manner. The palace was filled with sorrow and fear. It was then the 12th fairy stepped forward quietly. A serene expression floated on her face, and she spoke in a warm voice to the queen. "Do not be too saddened, my queen. My blessing remains yet. Even if the princess pricks herself on a spindle, she will not die. Instead, she will fall into a deep sleep for 100 years along with this castle." Hearing this, the king and queen breathed a sigh of relief, albeit slight. Although they could not completely prevent the 13th fairy's curse, the blessing of the 12th fairy, ensuring the princess would not die but sleep, offered them some comfort. Yet, the king remained uneasy, deeply worried and saddened by the thought of his daughter not dying but falling asleep for 100 years. He decided to rid the entire kingdom of all spindles, burn all the spindles in the kingdom. Following this command, spindles were gathered from across the kingdom, and a great burning took place. The rising flames seemed almost to burn away the sorrow and despair. Through this, the king and queen hoped to protect the princess from the curse. The fairies' blessings all came true. The princess grew up warm-hearted, wise, and beautiful. She spread kindness to everyone, solved difficult problems with wisdom, and her beauty became renowned throughout the land. The day the princess turned 15 arrived. It was a day many had awaited and feared. The king and queen, unaware of what would happen, left the castle briefly to attend to state affairs. The princess spent her time alone inside the castle. With a heart full of curiosity, she explored every corner, delighting in discovering places she had never been. During her exploration, she came upon an old, worn tower. At the end of the tower, there was a door with a key inserted into it. Turning the key, the door quietly opened. Inside was an old woman spinning at her wheel. The sound of the spinning wheel filled the room, intriguing and novel to the princess. "Hello, grandmother, what are you doing?" asked the princess, curiosity in her voice. "Spinning thread," the old woman replied kindly. "May I try it?" The princess could not hide her curiosity about the spinning wheel. The grandmother nodded and handed the wheel to the princess. But, ouch! As the princess tried to spin, she pricked her finger on the spindle. Her face turned pale, and she looked pained. A drop of blood formed on the pricked finger, and the princess felt her strength draining. The grandmother looked on with deep worry at the princess's injury. "Oh, why am I so sleepy?" After pricking her finger, The princess was overcome by an irresistible drowsiness. As she fell into a deep sleep, everything in the castle began to sleep as well. The king and queen, just returned to the castle, fell asleep in their chairs without knowing what had happened. Their faces were full of worry and fatigue, but as they slept, their expressions became peaceful. Even the cat in the courtyard, curling its tail, suddenly succumbed to sleep, though it lay there lazily as usual. This time it was in a deep, motionless sleep. The water in the pot, boiling furiously, also fell asleep as if time had stopped. Though the flames still heated the pot, the water no longer boiled but rested quietly. Thus, every living being and object in the castle, from the moment the princess pricked herself on the spindle, fell into a magical sleep. Even the birds hiding among the leaves stopped their fluttering and slept, while the world outside the castle moved on. Inside, it was filled with peace and stillness as if time had stopped. Everything that slept in this castle was as if forgotten by time, quiet and tranquil. The king and queen, the courtiers, and all the animals in the castle fell into 100 years of sleep with the princess. This magical sleep was the result of the intertwined curse of the 13th fairy and the blessing of the 12th fairy. Around the garden, a rose hedge began to grow. At first, it seemed like mere decoration, but over time, the hedge grew denser, eventually covering the entire garden. The rose hedge was beautiful but also very dangerous, filled with sharp thorns. As years passed, a story began to circulate among the people. In the garden sleeps a princess, waiting to be awakened by a prince. This legend spread far and wide, captivating many. Hearing the tale, many princes sought out this mystical garden. They attempted to breach the rose hedge to awaken and free the princess, but all were trapped by the thorny hedge, losing their lives to its peril. Many years passed, and the rose hedge grew even denser, becoming an impenetrable barrier. It seemed to isolate the castle completely from the outside world. Yet, the story continued to spread, fascinating many. The tales of princes attempting to rescue the princess remained in people's hearts, undiminished by time. With the garden entirely enclosed by the rose hedge, the story of the sleeping princess became a legend, destined to be remembered forever. One day, a prince from a neighboring kingdom happened by the castle. He had heard the story of the sleeping princess from an old man. "I will enter the castle and rescue the princess," the prince declared firmly. The old man looked at him with worried eyes, but the prince, undeterred by the warning, proceeded towards the castle. Then, something miraculous happened. As the prince approached the rose hedge, it seemed to sense his intent and parted, creating a path for him. The impenetrable rose hedge that had thwarted so many before, magically opened for the prince. This day marked 100 years since the princess had fallen asleep. It was not mere coincidence but a moment fated by the 12th fairy's final blessing. The prince walked the path made by the rose hedge, carefully entering the castle. Inside, the prince was astonished. Horses in the stables neighed in mid-call. Bread in the ovens rose as if time had stopped. Everything appeared as though frozen in slumber. The castle was so silent that only the prince's footsteps echoed loudly. Undeterred by the silence and stillness, the prince explored the castle, drawn to the magical scenes yet focused on his mission to find the princess. Finally, The prince reached the top of the ancient tower. There, an old door awaited him. Entering, he found the princess asleep and stopped quietly by her bed. At that moment, the prince held his breath, captivated by the sleeping beauty's grace. The princess lay there peacefully, her face radiating pure beauty. Gazing at the beautiful princess, the prince was enchanted by her pure, peaceful beauty. He leaned down slowly and kissed her lips gently. This kiss was not a mere act. It was the key to breaking the long-standing spell on the princess. With that kiss, a magical aura filled the room. The long-standing spell on the princess was finally broken. Awakening from 100 years of deep sleep, the princess slowly opened her eyes, her gaze sparkling as if seeing a new world. The princess looked at the prince who had awakened her. Her eyes were filled with gratitude and affection. Though she had been in a deep sleep for so long, her heart was filled with hope and anticipation for a new beginning. The moment their eyes met, a profound bond formed between them, not merely a chance encounter but a deep, fateful connection they both instinctively recognized. With the princess's awakening, everything in the castle came to life. The prince's courage and love had shattered the long curse. The prince and princess, hand in hand, descended from the tower. With each step they took together, magical events unfolded. Everything that had slept in the castle began to awaken one by one. Overcoming a century of sleep, the castle quickly regained its vitality. The king and queen, awoken from their slumber, looked upon the prince and princess with eyes filled with wonder and joy. Amazed by the unchanged appearance of the princess and the brave prince who had awakened her, the queen smiled and said, "What a perfect pair they make." The courtiers, servants, and even the animals, all awakened from their deep sleep, shared in this joyful moment. The once stagnant castle was filled again with movement and life, as everyone celebrated this miraculous occasion. In the blessings of all these people, the prince and princess reaffirmed their love for each other. Their love, which had brought about this miracle, gave hope and joy to everyone in the castle. From that day forward, the castle returned to its lively state, and the love story of the prince and princess spread far and wide. Sometime later, the prince and princess were married. The wedding was even more magnificent and splendid than the feast held for the princess's birth. The castle, filled with people from across the land and dignitaries from afar, was abuzz with festive spirit. Even the rose hedge surrounding the castle seemed to celebrate their happiness, blooming fully as if symbolizing their love. The wedding was filled with music, dancing, and laughter. Gazing at each other with love and happiness, the prince and princess exchanged vows. Their love touched everyone's hearts, and the sound of applause blessing their union filled the castle. The wedding of the prince and princess was a moment of magic, sending a message of love and hope to all. Their love story, through the ages, would be remembered as a legend. After the wedding, the prince and princess lived happily ever after, loving each other deeply.